My name is Elizabeth Janzen, and I'm Assistant Professor of Flute at Texas A&M University, Kingsville. This video is part of a series of mini lessons designed to highlight practice techniques and approaches that you can use to better prepare for the 2014 Texas All-State auditions on the flute. Today we're looking at the first Etude, number 1 in C major by Bach, with some suggestions on how you can add dynamics to polish your performance. Baroque composers who lived and worked in the 16 and 1700s generally did not include dynamic markings in their published materials. So it's not unusual to see an etude like this one by Johann Sebastian Bach with no dynamic markings whatsoever. This doesn't mean that you shouldn't be adding in some of your own. As musicians, it's our job to add and shape dynamics and convince our audiences of that interpretation. So when I sit down to add dynamics to a piece, I usually start with two approaches. The first is following the melodic direction of the music, and the second is by following patterns. So let's start with melodic direction or contour of the phrase. This is a really great starting point, especially for flutists, because you can generally follow the tendencies of the instrument. In other words, as the music gets higher, you can crescendo, and as the music gets lower, you can decrescendo. For example, the opening of the etude ascends in contour, so I'm going to crescendo through those bars. Or, in contrast, the beginning of the second section descends, so I'm going to decrescendo through those bars. But once you've gone through a piece following the contour and adding your dynamics accordingly, it's important to remember that this is only a starting point, and this approach is by no means valid in every situation. You also have to consider factors like patterns. And when I start to look at the patterns, the rhythmic patterns in a piece and how they repeat, I think of conversations. So one conversation that I think of is in the form of a question, or in general, an echo in the pattern. So for example, if I said, "I did okay," right? The question ends more gently than the beginning of the statement. And so, for example, in measures 3 and 4, I shape that like a question. Or you can have the opposite, which is a more insistent repetition. Think about how you might shape your words or speak if you have to repeat yourself to a little brother or sister or cousin. "Don't touch my things. Don't touch my things." When you repeat yourself, your voice gets louder and it's weightier. And a musical conversation can reflect that emotion in the same way. So here's an example where I use that technique in measures 51 and 52. Of course, the music is also ascending there, so I'm actually meeting both of those criteria that we've already talked about. Finally, the third conversation that I think about is an argument between more than one person, where you have an alternating louds and softs because the people are going back and forth in this argument. You usually have a dominant voice or a louder voice, maybe they're winning the argument, and a more submissive or soft voice, maybe they're the loser of the argument. Here's an example of how I shape a phrase with that in mind from bars 46 through 48. So you see, by following your eyes and using melodic direction, but also using your imagination and conversations that you're familiar with from everyday interactions, you can create all sorts of colors and shapes in this piece of music by interpretation and imagination. And I think that's one of the best ways to catch the ear of an examiner or jury member, by showing something original. Good luck and happy practicing.